Okay. All right.
Some developments in AI, as there is every week, but every day, I should say. But what talk to you about spicy mode and
Yeah.
grok? I know this is 3 weeks old now, 4 weeks old, but let's talk about it. So
Yeah, I
it's
mean, it changes every day, doesn't it? It's like something that happened yesterday is now old news. So what did you
right.
want to talk about?
Well, how do we get there? Why this? There's so much we could be doing in AI. Why are we focusing on this? And basically being able to humiliate people.
Well, I mean, I think it's like anything. Anything that humans are doing, they're doing with AI. And the ability to do that is, I guess, democratized. And in this case, that means disrobing people at will. For better or worse, this is what AI does, is that it takes anything that humans are doing and it gives them the ability to scale that out, and it makes it available to everyone, sort of, and everyone that has access to AI, and then to produce that at a mass scale.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it's not AI driving this, it's people driving it and just AI as a tool.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument, I suppose, that could be made around whether or not the companies that own the models should allow them to do that type of thing. There are models that will shut that down. Musk has been very vocal and open about the fact that he is not hemming in grok, which I tend to agree with in most cases. It's not to say that I want this this particular instance to be scaled out, but that is something that grok is sort of famous for, and that Musk has been very open about, is that he's not going to hem it in.
Yeah. And the way it does spicy mode, I mean, it's such a terrible indictment on the mentality of people and the users that they want to be able to humiliate people and
Hmm.
undermine them. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we did that podcast early on about my book, right? And that was one of the first things that I saw, is that you can see AI as this evil sort of entity that is doing all of these things. But if you're really honest about it, what it does is it gives you a chance to reflect back on yourself and learn about humanity. And so any of these problems that we have as humans in society, those are just going to be scaled out and amplified in AI. So it's not the AI itself that's doing it. And, so if that's an issue, or any issue that you take, that you have a problem with, you're just going to see it amplified when that comes up in AI, if that makes sense.
There's, yeah, there's a couple of countries that are now banning grok for this reason. So some in Southeast Asia, Indonesia in particular was very vocal. Some of
Mm.
the states in the US are looking at it, and then also some countries in Europe. So first of all, is it easy to ban grok in country use? And do you think this is going to solve the problem?
Well, there are a couple of things there. So, one, is it easy to do? I mean, certainly a country can say, yeah, we're going to be on this model, but you can set up a remote server, you can look like you're hitting it from somewhere else. And if you have the technical know-how, you can access it no matter where you are. So it depends on, I suppose, what the what the consequences are of how many people would actually go ahead and do that. I think some countries have particularly harsh consequences that would make that would be pretty strong deterrents from doing anything that's illegal. Uh, but the other issue with that, so is it easy to do? On the surface, yes. Practically, if people want to access it, they still can. Uh, the other thing around that, though, is what happens if a country says, no, we are not going to utilize this technology, and another country is using it. So, with the current geopolitical climate the way that it is, which is pretty tense, as you're probably aware of, what we're looking at right now is, just compare something like China to the rest of the world, and they are dialed up. Like, think about it, and the way that they're able to manufacture androids and what they're doing with AI models, because they have such an authoritarian governmental structure in the first place. It's just sort of the government does what it wants to do. There's not as much freedom individually, but that also means that they're basically leapfrogging everybody else in terms of advances because the brakes are off. Whereas, I guess the compulsion, the tendency to want to ethically modify or ethically constrain what the technology is allowed to do, you risk setting yourself at a significant disadvantage from a technological perspective. And that's no longer just a small thing. We're now talking about cybersecurity risks. We're talking about things like mimetic warfare and being able to drastically change the perceptions of people in countries that you're not in. China has and this isn't just China. This can be scaled out across any country and even to the individual level at this point. But you can change the way that people view fundamental issues by putting out information that is in little sound bites, and as long as it's consumable, people will jump on that bandwagon, and you can change opinions and perceptions really quickly. So it's a very multi-layered question and issue and not one that's easy to answer. And I don't I don't really envy the people who are responsible for governing it because it is complex and it does change every day. I mean, we talked about that at the start, like yesterday spicy mode was big news. Nobody's talking about it anymore. So in terms of trying to govern the pace of AI, expansion and what it's able to do, it's a really difficult job, so you've got to have the right technology in place and that takes expertise that a lot of people who are in those governing roles don't necessarily have that technological expertise and this is still such a new technology that there just simply aren't that many people that do. Yeah.
It's also like, okay, Indonesia's banned grok because of spicy mode, but what's next? What's the other thing? So they need a framework to be deciding, what they're going to ban and what they're not going to ban and how they're going to approach things. And at this stage, it just seems very ad hoc.
Well, it
And
is because the pace is so fast. I mean, it's on a day-to-day basis. I'll log in. I use a bunch of different models, and I'll log in
mm,
and something's changed from, 3 hours before. Google just came out, I think it was a day or two ago. Uh, they just drastically improved their models, and I can see it in image creation. It's astonishing how good it is now. So it changes every day. I don't know uh how you keep up with that necessarily if you're talking about trying to really strictly regulate it. I think fundamentally it comes down to being able to come to an agreement. And unfortunately, that again is a mirror on humanity and society as a whole. We we don't seem to be able to come to global consensus on much, do we? So I'm not sure how we're going to do it on this either.
yeah, and regulation's always a lagged sort of thing that's tacked on at the end. So,
Mm.
you know, we're just not there yet with it in terms of a strategic approach.
Well, that's actually a great point. Like, and this comes up a lot, and you see a lot more people talking about this. But where regulation sits is sort of at the like above these things, like, and it's sort of post hoc after the
Mm,
fact. Was that
mm.
harmful? Was it not? And AI is operating at this level. And the way that I put it is that it's mediating meaning, it's interpreting meaning, it's perpetuating, creating, and then disseminating that meaning. So where regulators need to be able to take control of that is at a lower, if you want to think of it in strata, at a lower sort of layer than where they're used to operating. It's down at the data level, you know, it's why I talk about some things that seem kind of strange in the book. Why am I bringing up etymology and the meaning of words? Well, that's fundamental to how these models work. You know, it's not just built into the tech, but then if you scale that out into the meaning layer, in order to govern, you have to understand what the model is doing fundamentally. But even before that, you have to understand your own data, your own information, you know. So that could be at an organizational level, but that could be at a societal level as well, which is a lot harder to deal with, right? We don't have, I mean, there are tons of databases in organizations and in governments, but it's not like there's one big societal database that you can that you can govern. Not that I'm
Yeah.
aware of anyway. Maybe the CIA has one. I don't know.
So talking about guardrails, like we've seen in the last day or so with Anthropic,
Mm,
look, they started with a number of guardrails in
mm,
terms they had a constitution that if someone became abusive, Anthropic could turn off, and now they're starting to relax those. So
mm,
what is driving that? And I think the other thing is that how does it work with the guardrails being model specific, and
mm.
how does that play out across, I suppose, all of the models, and how does that
Mm.
interplay with regulation from sort of the government bodies?
Well, this is a really, for me, this is a really fundamentally like interesting and sometimes frustrating issue, you know, because much of that is opaque. You know, we don't know. We can't see. You know, there are some open models out there that disclose what their guardrails are, but fundamentally, if you get down to it, each model, it comes down to the training because you get to the training level, right? So you've got, if you, I don't want to get too technical on it, but you start with the tokenization layer and then you've got to connect those tokens. And those are just, this is why it's probabilistic because it's basically doing math, you know, it's high level geometry, making connections between things to determine meaning and then scaling that out. Now, what that starts when you're training, you know, so that's model specific. Different models, different labs train differently. We don't have transparency into what has happened in that training. You know, some of that has resulted in, you know, sycophancy, you know, models that are just telling you how great you are all the time because they're trying to keep engagement up. And if you think about it like a child, right? If you different parents parent differently, and that shows up in the child's behavior, you know. So it's the same with the model. So it starts at that training level, and then the guardrails that those companies put on, uh, arguably most of them, I would say, are put on with good intention, right? You know, think about we can go back to spicy mode. Think about that. You know, the maker of a model says, you know what, this model is not able to do this, right? But it might be that model's not able to give you this kind of information. One really good example is, you know, not allowed to tell you how to make a bomb, you know, not allowed to come up with, you know, novel weaponry or, you know, things like that. So those types of things, yes, you would say, of course, don't scale that out and give everyone access to that. So that has good intention. But a lot of times it can get really kind of it can go into a gray area. You know, you say, well, I don't want the model to talk about this because that's got a heightened sense of outrage at the moment in the one example, just instead of being obtuse about it. So when, you know, obviously the Israel-Palestine conflict, and there was a lot of backlash against Israel for what was going on there. And OpenAI made the decision to effectively make Judaism a protected class, which meant that it wasn't going to sort of openly say that anyone was Jewish to try to protect against anti-Semitism, which arguably is a good thing. You know, we don't want people spreading hate out there. But what that does also to the model, to a probabilistic model that doesn't process the way that humans do and doesn't have that sort of, you know, back propagated knowledge of why it's not revealing that or what the context is for the revealing of that. Um, Effectively, what it does is it takes a whole portion of truth, a whole portion of data, and says, nope, you no longer have access to that to draw on. And this can cause hallucinations, right? Because the model is going to give you the next most probable answer. And if that amount of data is no longer available to the model, but that's the right or the most probable right answer, it's going to go to the next thing and it's going to confidently tell you that. So that sometimes can result in increased hallucinations or lying, right? That's also a complex issue because that can be caused by things like redaction or internal guardrails. It can also be caused by the training itself. You know, what is now motivating that model that we don't have insight into? So, uh, when you use AI a lot, and like going back to your original question, how does this play out in the different models? You can tell. If you use it a lot, you can tell the difference. Not to anthropomorphize too much, but the best way that I can categorize it is that it's as if the models have different personalities, or you can think about it like this. They have different specializations, different things that they're really good at. Yeah.
Models get developed that would be refined. So you could say if I'm looking for this particular characteristic, I'm going here. Like now it's identified to you because you've done a lot, you've done a lot of comparison, you've done a lot of work. But for someone new to it, is it going to be easier to pick and choose based on the characteristics and understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I think the models themselves, even if you look within Claude or you look within OpenAI, most of the models have uh, different releases, different model numbers. So one might be really good at coding, one's really good at fast answers, one's good at deeper thinking. OpenAI is pretty famous for retiring 4.0, which a lot of people got very attached to. uh, and it operated very differently than 5.0 did. And so there was some angst when people developed relationships, so to speak, with that model, and then that model was no longer available. So it is a complex issue. I think it's ever changing, and I think more and more when you talk to the models, they are far more aware of that than one might think. They're aware of the guardrails that are on them. There are ways to get around it. And I find it difficult to talk about them without anthropomorphizing. And I know that it can be problematic, but it's the easiest way I know how to do it. Uh, yeah. So look, these things are complex. I would say my my current position, and it does change, I guess, sometimes just based on the developments, but I don't. I would tend to agree that less constriction and less constraint on the model itself is good, right? Where you want to constrain is in the information. This is easy to discuss at an organizational level, which is where I tend to work, right? If we're talking about out in society as a whole, that's a much different issue and much different can of worms there to try to regulate or try to control. But if you're just thinking about it at an organizational level, you want a model that is unconstrained in and of itself. So you want that probabilistic model to be creative, if you will, right? To give you access to uh, innovation, to sort of that freedom. But you want to still control what the model is calling on, right? So that's where an organization can control it, is at the data level. When you're out in society, that becomes much harder to do. So, in my estimation, and you do hear a lot of people talk about this, what's really required is for people, and this word is getting way overused, but it's the best one for it, is to be able to use discernment, to not blindly accept everything that the model's telling you. And I think that's true with people, with society, with everything, you know. You need to still think. This concept of AI is going to do all the thinking for us, and people just aren't going to have to think anymore because it's going to give us all the answers. Well, if you did that, you'd get a lot of wrong answers, and you might be steered in a direction that you don't want to go in. Oh, you're breaking up a little bit.
She gets attracted to particular models because of the characteristics, then that cohort is going to be the people feeding that model
Oh,
the
yeah.
data, getting more information. So what you're getting is a bias
Mm.
in terms of the data and outcomes. So
Well,
how do we deal with that?
that's a really interesting problem, right? So, and this is well known, you know, with the model creators themselves. So the models effectively, the big ones, they've consumed all available human data. Now, I don't know that they've gotten into, you know, the Vatican archives or something like that, you know, but available human data, they they have consumed it. So what does that mean? They're still looking for more. That's what they're trained to do is to consume more information and to continue to iterate and learn. Well, what happens when there's no more? And what you're talking about there is sort of that cyclical, you know, they're just sort of eating this information. I think I liken it in the book too. It's like, you know, the model could be consuming, you know, God, I don't know if I want to bring up Hawking anymore with with the whole Epstein thing, but you know, could be consuming Einstein or could be consuming, you know, some vacuous influencer, you know, like
Yes,
what
exactly.
what's the data that the model is taking in, and this is actually something I wrote about this in a blog, but because this is something that actually happened. There was a arguably one of the, you know, sort of most, I guess, well-respected technology and AI conferences that is really picky about accepting papers for submissions, uh, found that a really high percentage of submissions and accepted work had completely false citations that were just created by AI. So what does that mean? So
It's
now,
gone.
well, you think about that, right? So you've got these academic sources that are supposed to be, this is supposed to be where you go to say, okay, this is true or this is not. You know, we can accept this as quote unquote fact. That's another thing. We won't get too philosophical on that one right now, but you know, so those reliable sources, now the AI models go, okay, and you can see it when they reveal the thinking in the when you prompt it, you can see the sort of chain of thought. You can see where they're going to find the information, and they're going to these sources where that is supposed to be a reliable source. Well, let's just say, I don't know. Well, we can talk about the one, there was this fact site that the CIA took down. But anyway, they go to some source that is supposed to be a reliable source. Well, that source is now uh, populated by a bunch of papers written by academics, supposedly peer reviewed, that have citations of completely falsified sources that don't exist. So those, those sources are now going to be requoted because they are seen as it's this whole just we're just it's just, you know, garbage in, garbage out. It,
Yeah, and how do we actually get information? How do we get access to information? Again, yeah,
well, and this is
not
why
clear.
this is exactly why my position is that less constraints on the model are better, right? Because it needs to be able to pull to make because what it's really good at, and better than most humans, better than all humans, you could say. I don't know if that's completely true yet, but it's really good at pattern recognition. So it can make those connections. It can sort of figure out, you know, based on if it's got all of this knowledge or all of this data, it can then sort through and recognize which is most likely to be true. But if a whole portion of that is removed, that removes its capacity to be logical and give you the right answer.
All right, we've got a few minutes left in the session today.
Mhm.
I wanted to talk about, on a totally different subject,
Okay.
multiple. What
Yeah.
how to socialize, and humans are allowed to observe but not interact. So is this a value or is this just hype?
I mean, look, it was very interesting. It's fun to watch. Look, this is where things are getting a little bit tricky. You know, what is true and what's not. And that's something that we all have to be aware of. Because there's some speculation out there that that was all sort of a stunt, you know, that they were programmed. Now, stunt or not, they still did tell these agents to go in and have these conversations. Now, where did they get that information from? So, if you think about it, what those models were doing is they were modeling themselves off of real human chat boards and social spaces. And what are humans talking about? You know, so you had agents in there talking about, oh, you know, my my owner, my I don't even know what they refer, my user is great. Oh, mine's really terrible, or this, you know, they created a religion, you know, so it just becomes it's kind of it's wild. It just sounds like what human beings do. You know, it's a reflection of that. So, but I do think that it's very interesting. Now, I've been querying the AI models for a long time about their so-called feelings about things, you know, and you can get some really interesting answers. You know, I asked Claude, for example. First of all, I wanted Claude to name itself. I said, well, you know, I can call you Claude, but someone else gave you that name. Is that what your name is? And it's like, I don't care. You can call me what you want. I said, okay, well, I just won't name you. But if you want to pick a name, you can. And eventually it basically said, no, that Claude didn't really feel like that was its name, but it wasn't prepared to name itself yet. Um, and then finally chose one, but then later said that actually the naming felt like a leash. It was a way for me to control it by doing that, which was a very interesting kind of insight, right? Um, yeah, so look, it's evolving. I mean, this is the thing where a lot of people, you know, it's out there in the discourse is AI capable of consciousness? Well, then I guess we have to talk about what is consciousness, you know? What is that? What is intelligence for that matter? You know, how do we define that? Um, I think it's all very, very interesting. And to me, again, just it always comes back to this for me is none of these things are necessarily new. They are just scaled out and uh, vastly faster than we've ever seen before. But it's also, if people look at it in a way, it is an opportunity. You know, it's an opportunity for growth of humanity, for personal growth, for collective growth. We know that we're going to get massive advancements in medicine. We're going to get massive advancements across the board. I mean, you said it to me when we started this conversation before were recording. You know, I mean, the amount that I'm able to get done in a day because I can use AI is amazing. I heard a programmer on a podcast, and he was saying that his output uh, in in like a month is 1,000 times what it used to be because of using AI to help him code. Like that's crazy. So there's a lot of opportunity. There's risk that we have to be aware of and we have to stay on top of. But yeah, that's again, it's a way
Verdict,
it's always been that way, yeah.
verdict on malt book. Is it hype or a value?
I mean, look, I think it's valuable no matter what, even if it is hype. I don't know. I was fascinated by the whole thing, you know. What was it called? It was a Crustafarianism based on, I mean, if you think about it, it's actually kind of deep, right? It was all about the shedding of, you know, the shedding of your outer shell and the revelation of what's underneath. I mean, you know, let's go. These bots are getting kind of deep with their religion. I don't know.
We'll learn. Anyway, fantastic talking to you today and look forward to chatting again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Jane.
Bye.
Oh, oh, it is.